Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Moving Freight Breakout session taking place today as part of the LowCVP annual conference. I'm James McGeachie, and I'm the Technical and Program Director here at LowCVP. It's my pleasure to host today's breakout in conjunction with my colleague Brian Robinson, who leads our Commercial Vehicle Working Group. In the session today, we're going to focus on two different themes. There we go. The potential and desire for significant change within urban logistics in a post-COVID-19 world, and the appetite for a green recovery to drive the decarbonisation of long-haul transport. So two pretty weighty subjects, and tackling these will be a panel of 4 speakers representing quite a broad spectrum of the industry. And I'm delighted to introduce those speakers. We have Olly Craughan, who's CSR General Manager at DPD. We have Chris Ashley, Head of Policy, Environment and Regulation at Road Haulage Association. Ian Wainwright, Director at Future City Logistics. And John Comer, Product Manager at Volvo Trucks. So welcome, guys. Thank you very much for participating. Today's running order will look something like this, and hopefully very like this. So we've got the introduction session where I'm just going to fly through today, and then we've got quite an aggressive timing for the guys who are presenting. So Olly and Ian are going to go first on the urban logistics, followed by Chris and John on green recovery and decarbonisation of long-haul transport. There are Q&A sessions, as you can see there. So there will be a slot that follows each pair of speakers. So please do all get involved. I'd like to kick things off with Olly, who will take us through his presentation on behalf of DPD.
Thanks, James. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I hope you're safe and well wherever you are. I've got 5 minutes, so I'll run through this presentation pretty quickly. I head up sustainability at DPD, and I'm very proud to do so because we're delivering sustainability at a crucial time for the company, the country, and the climate. I think it's even more important now in the COVID era, and especially with the links between air quality and our ability to survive the virus. It's time to step up and not step back. Okay, James, if you could go to the next slide, please. So, electrification of our fleet, sustainability is now a key pillar of DPD's work. It sits alongside other key strategies and is central to the very nature and vision of our business. It's changed and it was announced by our CEO, Dwayne McDonald, at our annual conference in February. Okay. Next slide, please, James. So that strategy was to achieve 10% in our electric fleet. I'm glad to say that we've actually done that within the first 6 months of the year. COVID has not prevented us or slowed us to achieve that. So we're 6 months ahead of that target. It's also a 400% growth in our EV fleet from the end of last year. We only had 139 vehicles on fleet at that moment. And the main strategy was to be the UK's leader in sustainable delivery. Next slide, please, James. And it's a little video. So we've achieved 4.2 million parcels on our EV fleet so far this year, and this is this has increased to 1 million parcels per month delivered emissions-free due to the increase in volumes over the COVID period. Next slide, please, James. Thank you. So that's saving 8 million kilograms of carbon emissions. Okay, and as that video showed, we're going to be delivering over 2 million parcels on our EV fleet over our peak period this year as well, so saving even more CO2 than we previously would have. Our employees, our service providers share our vision to be the UK's leader in sustainability. We are all proud and supporting the transition to green, and they're part of this journey as well. James, next slide, please. So to achieve our 10%, we've sourced a variety of EVs, from the EAV cargo bike, which is a purpose-built quadricycle, has a 250-watt motor. The Paxter that we sourced from Norway, Norwegian Post used that vehicle. We use the Nissan ENV. This accounts for about 90% of our current EV fleet at the moment. We have Peugeot, Mercedes, and 2 Mitsubishi e-Canters that service our Westminster depot in the ULEZ zone, so it's all emissions free. James, next slide, please. Thank you. So, proud to announce that earlier this year we ordered 100 3.5-ton MAN ETGs. They will be delivered from August this year, adding to our electric fleet. They've been altered to right-hand drive by MAN for DPD. Okay, but even with this order, our biggest challenge in this industry is the lack of availability in a right-hand drive 3.5-ton van in the EV market. And it's important that we have one that has the range, but more importantly, payload to seriously challenge the diesel equivalent and at comparable cost as well. And as you can see, the COVID pandemic hasn't stopped us or slowed our implementation of our strategy. But to continue the momentum in the post-COVID world, we need to stimulate supply to meet business demand. We need to introduce zero-emission vehicle mandates to require manufacturers to produce an annually increasing percentage of zero-emission vehicles. We need to drive demand, extending grants for electric vehicles and charge points. And I think on the air quality front, we need to have a standardized clean air and zero emission zone policy that has consistency across towns and cities in the UK.
Sorry, Ollie, 1 minute.
James, next slide, please. Thanks. So we're not just all about vehicles and sustainability. Through COVID, we have continued to donate. Our Eco Fund, with year-to-date 50 donations, over £70,000 to local, small community and school projects, helping communities and schools in an obviously even tougher time. Next slide, James. And on top of that, in February, we produced and gave every employee and service provider a reusable bottle. And so far this year, even through the COVID pandemic, we've saved the equivalent of 154,000 plastic bottles as well. Okay. Thank you for your time. Thank you, James.
That's brilliant, Ollie. Thank you very much, and especially for being first and definitely keeping to time. That's excellent stuff. Okay, we'd like to go straight on then to Ian. I just unmute you there, Ian, and there we go. Okay, thank you very much, Ian.
Okay, so I think Ollie made it very clear that certain companies have certainly benefited from the past 3 months, 4 months, but we know it's been an incredibly uncertain time. And let's be honest, I don't know any of the answers either. So all I've tried to do here is to pull together some of the ideas that seem to be circulating and really try and get some predictability. Because the work of decarbonising freight involves a whole series of different stakeholders. It involves the cities, the governments, the regulators, and us as individuals. How much are we consuming? Where do we consume it? And when do we consume it? We'll do the next slide, please, James. I think critically, and whether it's for a short period or a long period, COVID has changed some urban transport things. It's accelerated some trends without a doubt, certainly in terms of online ordering. It's going to accelerate active travel programs. It's going to accelerate some stuff about road space reallocation. Now, whether the public remain temporary and for how long, I don't know. If you want to put the next slide up, James, please. I think loads of people keep talking about a new normal. I think the trouble is we still aren't really certain of what the new normal looks like, and what we're actually in is a new temporary. And that new temporary is going to evolve over a period of time. The public transport capacity has dropped to 15 to 20% max. That is not long-term sustainable. You know, it's long-term sustainable for public funding to go into public transport if that's what's occurring. There's reduced confidence in cities and large gatherings. So what happens? You know, Glastonbury next year, if it happens, is it going to be as big? Who knows? The supermarkets had a doubling of volume. Sainsbury's have reported 87% increase in home delivery activity. Part of that is just a shift from all the food that we consume out of the house in terms of restaurants, bars, coffee shops, etc., to in the house. Hence why half the stuff wasn't available. And all that home delivery that's great for DPD and others at the moment because we're all at home. When we're back out and about, how does that get delivered sustainably without us really annoying our neighbours? And if you've worked in logistics, and I've worked in logistics for 18 years, delivery drivers as key workers, about time, you know, the people don't realise quite how important some of this stuff is. So we know things have changed. If you want to do the next slide, James, the point is it's not changed to that extent. We know that the long-term outcomes probably are intensified. We know that people have recognised that air quality really has to change. We know we've got the decarbonisation issue with the climate crisis, but issues about road safety, particularly about more people doing active travel, cycling and walking, is not going to go away. And where congestion may reduce, what we can't do is just turn everything in a home delivery vehicle into an electric home delivery vehicle because the energy use is going to be crazy. And we still want to try and improve the economy. So freight and sustainable freight is essential to all of those activities. And it was, you know, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, as it was today, as it will be in 6 months' time. The balance may shift, but I think the point is we have to address all of them. Do you want the next slide, please, James?
1 minute, please, Ian.
Yep. So I think one of the issues, and neither of these sets of figures is right. There's some old figures from Transport for London and some figures I got from the Transport Decarbonisation Alliance. But what I think we have to do is look at what bits of freight are moving, what sectors are moving, and what sectors are changing quickly. Construction is never going to be on an electric vehicle in the near future. Next slide, please. And what I think we've got to be able to do is make sure that as we move forward, that industry can maintain some productivity and be cost effective. We use technology where it can assist, and it can assist with a lot of things, but we can't just deal with cleaner vehicles. We can't just mitigate the impact of what we're trying to do. We've actually got to try and minimise the road trips to start with. We've got to try and shift some of those in terms of the time and the place that they occur. And the classic in that is get the land use planning system to enable facilities. Olly is talking about a whole series of additional depots. Where are those depots going to come from? Because the planning system doesn't recognise necessarily the need for urban logistics hubs. So just to finish off, if you would, James, the next slide. If we take cleaner vehicles, it's one of a number of solutions. We know how to do it. We know what's available. But if you take those two things, so there's new with the electric vehicle trial, that, if you hit return, James, effectively, it needs some retiming. Otherwise, the congestion at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning is going to be a nightmare. If you take the cargo bikes, if you return again, that's going to change the land use planning. Where are those locations to be able to store the cargo bikes overnight? And actually, the option is probably more electric vehicles of various sizes. And actually consolidating in terms of how we procure goods, where we deliver those goods to, and how they then get moved on. And we need to consider the supply chain as a whole as we try and move towards decarbonising freight in the future. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Ian. And again, thank you for sticking to the time. Excellent stuff and a lot to cover. On to the first of the Q&A sessions. John and Chris, I don't know whether you'd like to have the first opportunity to comment, and then we'll open things up to the delegates in the audience.
I'm happy to go through this perspective. I mean, sadly, I was only able to come into this conference from about 1 o'clock onwards, for which apologies. And I think, what struck me is it's great to hear about the potential and what's possible. As an association, we are dealing with the here and now. As an association, we have to deal with sort of the practicality of how we want to get to where we want to be. So I think all I just say is lots and lots of great ideas. And absolutely, we will want to consider those in due course. But I think, certainly for our members, given that there's some quite considerable challenges out there right now, which I'll touch on in my presentation, it's sort of some help and some practical guidance as to how we get to where we want to be. I get the ideas, it's how we get there.
And John, yourself, when it comes to the urban
side? I mean, taking on Ian's point, it's, I suppose one of the interesting things is that freight and movement of goods has moved, and the public understand where their goods from. I suppose the key element is, do I need something the very next day? If we're going to not just managing the vehicles, but managing the utilisation, half-empty vehicles, just because we've got a service requirement. And then the other one is the transition. We have the lighter end of the electric vehicle market, and again, we'll touch on the heavy end. I mean, we're starting to roll out now, but it's quite a small rollout in terms of our design. And again, the key limitation today, obviously, is battery technology, and that will move forward. Again, the city, and again, I think we need to work away from just distribution. We need to look at what trucks that use the city or the city, because it's not just about taking the goods in. The other key element is taking the waste away. And then the other element is what do we do for the heavier end construction vehicles? Again, we'll touch on that later.
Cool, thank you, John. How's it going in the chat window, Brian? Have we got some?
Yeah, not too bad. We've been quite busy. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to try and refer to some of those questions. Apologies if I don't capture quite all of them, but I'll do my best. I'm actually going to start with a pre-arranged question of my own, but it relates very closely, particularly to the point Bill Clare has made, and that's, I think, it's mostly for Ian, but Olly as well, I'm sure will have a view. As how should we tackle the basic conflict between freight efficiency driving us towards fewer and bigger vehicles, and the sustainability electrification agenda tending to drive us towards lots of smaller electric trucks, vans, and even cargo bikes and e-bikes? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things we have to start thinking about is, yes, it's all very well replacing a vehicle with an electric vehicle, but if we're going to start buying loads of more newer, smaller vehicles to replace one big one, there's a whole series of issues. Currently a heavy goods vehicle driver has additional training. They have a better license. You have an operator's license to manage the business. There's a whole series of additional checks and balances that help to make sure that activity is done professionally and correctly. I'm not saying anything against van drivers, but by the time you get down to some of the cycle freight, if you talk to the cycle freight guys, the standard of the construction of some of those cargo bikes is pretty appalling. They're spending a lot of time welding bits of metal back together. But how, that embedded carbon in some of the, how many batteries do we need to keep those things going? We have to think, as John mentioned, effectively, some of the stuff about, well, how much stuff are we consuming? When do we need it? And what is a priority? If you take some of the stuff on fast fashion, yes, there was a queue for Primark when they opened because they don't have a website, but there's been a lot of talk about actually reusing fast fashion and reusing fashion stuff. So I think there's some issues that we need to try and recognize that we have to get into how people work and how they think and how they order and consume goods and services. There's not an ever expanding supply of raw materials on the planet. We have to think about some of that.
Thanks. Ollie, got you?
There's also a thing about right size of vehicle for the right location. So,
yeah, I think Ian's right. But DPD, we don't run half-empty vehicles. It's not just about EVs. It's about optimization, productivity, and ensuring the route's efficient. We run, and I've worked for DPD 8.5 years, and the 8 years of that I've been a site manager, so I know the operation very well. But yeah, we have the best technology known to man, we say, but in the industry to ensure that we're not running empty vehicles. But the 3.5 ton options, the issue with payload, obviously, we need something that can take the diesel 3.5 ton vehicles off the road and replace them. That not at a huge cost as well, because typically they cost a lot more than the diesels at the moment, but we do need a substitute.
Right, and Ollie, sorry, just one quickly from myself on that in particular. What would represent a useful range for you? So absolutely accept the payload challenge. But what becomes a useful range? Is it the whole diesel thing, or is there a half?
We have approximately 1,500 to 2,000 routes that do less than 60 miles a day, James. Someone's asked about charging network in the questions as well. A majority of our drivers are what we call owner drivers. They're self-employed, but they work for DPD. The van's branded DPD. They use our uniform, and their brand ambassadors do a fantastic job. But they typically take their van home. They charge at home. Obviously, there's some challenges with that in cities, maybe, or multi-occupancy houses. But this is where we need to promote charging on the street, obviously, and the infrastructure moving forward in the country with that. It was great to, obviously, Grant Shapps talked about £10 million investment in street charging, but we do have chargers at depot as well to be utilised.
Gotcha, thank you. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, okay. Another one for Ollie. Again, two questions that kind of link together. Neil Robson has asked whether you, Ollie, would support a charge on last mile deliveries to reduce the number of journeys for less critical items and force the customer to differentiate rather than make everything nominally free next day. And I already had thought of a more general question on that theme, and that's how can the COVID and climate emergencies help reset consumers' engagement with logistics, what they get delivered and how?
Look, we deliver a premium service. Our service levels are 99.5 and above. That's what our customers, the actual, the John Lewises of this world, the EEs, pay for, and that's something the consumer wants. It's the next day delivery business, and like I said, Brian, we put a lot of work in ensuring that our routes are optimized and efficient. So you're not driving around with a half empty, doing, multiple vehicles on the road doing empty miles. That's cool.
Right. Got time for a couple more, James?
Yep. I think we've got a couple of minutes. Let's squeeze them in.
Okay. I could add a little bit to that, actually, Brian. Yeah. Just in terms of, I think there's something that says, if you take freight overall, and whether it's on the national road network or an urban road network, it's not really paying its fair share. We are not. I mean, I'm not saying the operators aren't paying for what they're doing, but as consumers, we're not paying for the goods, or in the goods pricing isn't the issues about air quality and poor health. It's not in there about safety. The damage to the road network. You could talk to network engineers. So some of this stuff is about how freight is priced is a problem that needs to be addressed somehow during the sort of unrolling of vehicle excise duty and all the rest of it. Right.
Okay, thank you. And Ian, a question specifically from you from Will Reeves. It's actually, the question is, when are the London boroughs going to install more on-street charging points for van drivers or residents that want to swap over to hybrid or plug-in hybrid or EV cars? I'd like, given that we don't want to be too London-centric here, I'm going to broaden that out to say when our local authorities...
I think part of the issue is that most freight operators that are currently using electric vehicles don't spend long enough in one place on the curbside to actually, charge their vehicle. And I think we need to look at, what's the range of these electric vehicles, and can we actually do something a bit more sensible in terms of, where some of the charging is located. In terms of some of the sort of mid-size, trucks that are coming along, I think there may be something about at some delivery points, if you're offloading, there may be some stuff like they're doing with the Volvo buses, at the end of the turnaround point of the cycle. I think the stuff about how you access the curbside is going to become more difficult because there are more issues about pavements and pedestrians and cyclists and cycle lanes. And some of this, the boroughs really don't know where the stuff needs to be. That's one of the issues, is there's not people within the boroughs, whether it's London, whether it's the local authorities outside of London, who really understand enough about freight to be able to make the right decisions or to talk to the right people about where should we locate charge points in this particular high street.
I guess this relates to Timothy Lee has also asked a couple of questions, and I'll focus on one of them because it's very central to that point you just made, Ian. And that's, what opportunities and challenges do you see in the way urban roads are designed and planned to accommodate sustainable urban delivery logistics?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the temporary cycle lanes is a challenge, and I know there's been operators who've actually effectively been, denied the ability to actually make a delivery, and some locations may be struggling. Part of it is you have to be able to plan the road network changes in a way that facilitate delivery to the curbside. It's effectively a thing in the Highway Management Act that sort of says you've got to actually be able to provide access points to buildings. Part of this is about understanding, it's about getting the right design process in place. A lot of work was done at Transport for London for it to try and recognise it within their streetscape guidance. How much that gets put into effect in the long term, I don't know. And my concern at the moment is some of the short-term changes that people want to make long-term really aren't accommodating it. It's training. It's a lot. It's training and knowledge awareness and that type of stuff again.
Yeah, I think that's a point I made at LowCVP, that we get the vehicles and the fuels and the technologies in focus, but we forget the people issues, and I think it's absolutely vital. Yeah, I've got time for a couple of quick specific ones to finish off.
We could squeeze one. Well, meet you halfway. One of the two.
Right. In that case, I'll go with Tim Campbell, who's asked Olly. You've mentioned various 3.5-ton OEMs, but he's mentioned the Maxus. I think it's an e-Deliver, offers a fully electric right-hand drive 3.5-ton van. Just wonder whether you'd come across that and whether you'd considered it.
We have, Brian. Look, nothing's off the table. We're trying an LEVC, which is actually a London cab recently. Been talking to Vauxhall, Volta, we talk to all the suppliers, but something you've got to also remember is that if we end up operating 6,000 of these vehicles, what's the aftercare situation and the infrastructure? It's great that, some of these vehicles on market, but you've got to think, how robust are they? These drivers are doing 150 deliveries a day. You're getting in and out of the van multiple times. Wear and tear and build quality of some vehicles aren't as good as others. So look, we're open to trialing vehicles, but we've got to think further than just the vehicle. It is, if we bought 7,000 vehicles and we couldn't get the servicing turned around, we wouldn't have those vehicles to deliver the parcels. So sometimes, and me being new in this position, actually, that's a learning curve when I speak to transport department. I go to them about all these fantastic vehicles, but then they say, well, what about the servicing? How many garages and dealerships can deal with this? And you've got to think bigger picture. It's not just about the vehicle, it's everything else after that.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting various comments that why aren't we talking about long haul and rural and rather than just city? So it's handy that we're going to talk about long haul next, isn't it, James?
It is perfectly segued. Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you to Ian and Ollie for A, presenting, and B, answering the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So as teed up by Brian, we have Chris Ashley up next to talk around the topic of long haul. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, let me introduce myself. My name's Chris Ashley. I head up the policy section in the RHA on the environmental regulation. And I've got 5 minutes to rattle through a huge topic, basically, so I will do my best. Basically, if nothing else, by way of introduction, what our perspective is, that as a trade association, we represent the end user here. We represent end users who are going to be investing in the new technology that we want to see. And so therefore, we take a very pragmatic approach to the debate. We want to obviously see what's possible, but also, as I said earlier, it's also about how we get there. And for us, the emphasis for us really, I think, going forward is we want to see the right policy frameworks in place with the right standards, with the right consistent standards in place that will give our members the confidence to invest in the new technology that we want to see. I think it's fair to say, I'm going to raise the issue of clean air zones, that has been challenging for us in that it's not provided the stability of investment that we would have liked to have seen, particularly with older technology. So that's one of my key messages from this presentation is to say, we want to see the right policy frameworks in place. I want to plug our decarbonisation paper that we published in January this year, which just sets out our approach in a little bit more detail. But also, I just want to draw on the here and now that COVID-19 has had an economic impact. I don't want to dwell too much on that. This is about looking forwards, but I just want to end then on what our key asks are in terms of how we move forwards. So, James, if you want to do the next slide. Very briefly, this is the contents. Just touch on the green recovery, what we mean by that. I'd like to say that, we've had a good start on air quality, and with the right frameworks in place, there's no reason why we can't have that with decarbonisation. As I said, touch on the path to decarbonisation and also how we accommodate the crisis. James, if you want to move on. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide. It's taken from the Committee on Climate Change in terms of where they see the government should be focusing its direction. Lots are, on investing in low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure, retrofitting homes. As we know, Chancellor's announced £2 billion investment in vouchers to make them more energy efficient. When it comes to transport, the point I just want to make about transport is, yes, there's lots of clear vision and direction, I think, from the government in terms of where we go with cars and vans, net zero wise. We've talked about, how they, I think, ideally would like to bring forward the banning of diesel and petrol to 2032. Our point, though, is that we sometimes feel in our experience that the needs of freight is overlooked in the policy discussion. And we want to put sort of the needs of freight up front amongst the mindset of policymakers. And that's then all part and parcel of this agenda to make sure we have the right frameworks in place to support the investment that we want to see. Next slide. In terms of a good start regarding air quality, I really do want to say, hauliers have been doing their bit, albeit on the air quality agenda. And this slide is taken from the Department for Transport. It's their NOx emissions stats. Very briefly, just to focus on that green line. Okay, that's HGVs. And that's how over the last, 10 years, thanks to a considered investment, £1.9 billion by our estimate, we've seen NOx emissions decline by HGVs by up to 60%. Compare that, say, with the red line, which is cars, which is flatlined, and also the black line there, which is vans. And, we should perhaps not be surprised here that if we're seeing a shift to online retail, a shift in home deliveries, so we're seeing more use of vans and a consequential rise in emissions accordingly. we'd like to get that picture out. The next chart, though, just shows that with the right frameworks in place, you can actually deliver what you want. And what that chart shows is the number of HGVs currently on the road, broken down by the Euro emission standard. And the top green segment there is the Euro 6. And I think it's fair to say there is a correlation. You invest in the Euro 6 standard, which is a great standard. We've seen the decline in emission standards. In emissions. 1 minute, okay. Go very quickly on then. Next slide. Just like to plug our approach to decarbonisation. We, as an end user, we take a neutral view on this agenda. There's a wide variety of technology out there. We're not in the place of picking winners. It's very much about advising our members on what the technology can do to best meet their needs according to the policy context. If you want to skip on. And again, because I'm running out of time. But just a quick thing on the COVID-19, I think we can't overlook this has had an economic impact. The economic data coming out is weak. The next slide, I'm very happy for this to be circulated. This is a survey that we published back in June on the impact COVID was having on our members. It was showing about how many trucks are being parked up, and it showed a mixed picture across the economy, food doing better, but removals not. The point is, going forward, and this is my final slide, rattling through, what do we want? If we can recognise that the economy is in a weak position, moving forwards, we want to see, good, clear policy framework with good, clear standards in place to build back that confidence to invest. As I've said, we want freight considered upfront in policy considerations. And my final point, sequencing of activity moving forwards. There is an appetite in certain urban areas like London to pile on the green charges. Well, if we've got an economy which is weak at the moment, that's going to put businesses out of into insolvency and increase the job losses. Ultimately, potentially, there might be a political choice then to be made: is how much unemployment are we prepared to tolerate? So for us, sequencing, I think, of activity needs to be considered. It needs to be a sensible discussion. That's a quick rattle through of where we stand on this issue.
Apologies for accidentally pressing a button one too many times right at the end. I do apologise. And okay, well, we're straight then, I think, into your presentation, please, John. Thank you.
Good everyone. Yeah. Is it next slide? Yeah. My name is John Comer, product manager from Volvo Trucks, and on the next slide, we see that we realise through COVID that the distribution is actually the lifeblood. We talk about key workers. We got the main arteries and we've got the small veins, and like the blood, it delivers the goods and it takes away the waste, which is equally as important. And as I said, one of the things that we probably learned through COVID is not just necessarily about the vehicles. One of the things COVID did with the fewer vehicles on the road was allow for greater efficiency and speed up the movement of goods. We've seen operators see a 9% improvement in fuel consumption over that period of time, obviously helped by the good weather as well. And the next slide there, as a global truck maker, our drive is probably in three areas. All three areas are probably covered with policy, but obviously connectivity doesn't necessarily measure the efficiency from the tailpipe, but connectivity in relation to the distribution side helps better utilisation of the vehicle. And we've got connectivity there already today in measuring and managing the energy of the vehicle, but also in use. And in the future, obviously, we've got it connected with automation, again, helping the driver do a better job. Obviously, it still has his role. We've got high levels of automation today, and then obviously there's the drive to autonomy. And again, there's other initiatives like Zenzig, looking at automated freight, and then we've got the carbon future as well. And then the final driver is electric drive, and it's a very busy time to be working at a truck manufacturer with these three to balance, particularly when you look at the global truck manufacturers. Volvo of a size of about 150,000 trucks a year, and that's a global demand over platforms meeting several business needs. And as I said earlier, it's not just about distribution and logistics, it's about the trucks that work the city. A lot of trucks work the city actually need additional power requirements like refuse vehicles, skip loaders, etc. Next slide. Today, we work with alternative fuels. There's very little incentive for operators to go to alternative fuels. As Chris mentioned, we've done a major role in cleaning up the air with Euro 6 trucks, and Euro 6 is the basis for the clean air zone, and we've got a 7-year park of vehicles to help work with that clean air zone side. We also then have the next big debate within the industry is carbon and carbon reduction. So we're quite happy on that. Just hold it there. And again, one of the key elements with the carbon reduction is Vecto standards for truck. And a big driver for us is the change in legislation that Vecto brings. We've got to achieve a 15% reduction in carbon by 2025. So 15 by 25, and then 30 by 30. And one of the key things with us is we've got to take the operators with us, because they today, as Chris said, it's not mandatory for them. There is an incentive to push in the road to zero a voluntary reduction by 15%, but the vehicle manufacturers have got to drive that carbon change. And by doing that, we found that one size doesn't fit all. So we've got two types of vehicle here. We've got a gas vehicle, or LNG gas, for long haul, offering a 20% reduction in CO2, and for the city to meet the air quality demands and the noise plus the CO2 reduction, we've got the electric vehicle. Next slide.
1 minute, please, John. Thank you.
All right. So sizing the electric vehicle, we've looked at a 26-ton vehicle, maybe take 10 vans off the road, and ideal for a cycle. But obviously, again, we've got to consider the charging network. Next slide. And then commercially, on the long haul, we've got LNG up and running. We have probably around 600 of those working in the UK now, offering a 20% reduction on tailpipe emission, but obviously a bigger reduction wheel-to-wheel with biofuel. So the rollout for electrification is on the next slide. We have got the city vehicle we can control quite well. The construction element is a little bit more difficult, so we can see that in the next phase we have that rollout there, and the long haul we still see as a future vehicle. Probably one of the other questions we've got to ask there, if we look at the large long haul vehicle, could we make the long haul vehicle bigger and use a green corridor on a motorway at night to get a huge carbon saving? And then finally, as a manufacturer, we are very much in a transitional stage. So we, next slide, we are still working very much on a diesel-based technology, slowly introducing the electrification into the mainstream, and then as we transition further up towards 2030 and beyond, we're working with hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells. I think one of the interesting things, I saw a comment there about co-opetition, and I think one of that key elements to achieve those goals as global manufacturers, and you've probably seen it announced recently, is that Volvo will be working with Daimler on that next phase. So that gives you some idea of where we are with the vehicle manufacturer. So I hope that gives you an indication of where we are. And then obviously we've got to work with the policy, but also we've got to work with not just local regulation, but international regulation. Thanks very much as well.
Great, thank you very much, John. And on to our second Q&A slot. And as we did with the first, if we'd like to give Ian and Olly, I guess, first chance to comment.
I'll go
or
first.
possibly not, I don't know.
I mean, I think the you know, as I said before, I don't think you can tell for definite. I know I'm involved with the Centre for Sustainable Road Freight, and I know there's all sorts of debates that go on between, you know, what the future fuel may look like and things. But I think like most solutions, we're looking at a mixture I think it's partly the question of, if we want everything to be delivered to our door, then one of the things will be is, well, what does that impact do on the long haul transport? That's going to change some of it. So there's people in rail freight who have a very different view of where things should go. And again, we need some sort of clear infrastructure that was mentioned this morning to make sure that we can actually have a variety of supply chains for the different products that we consume. We are still not going to be able to grow avocados and all the produce that we need in this country. We've got to be able to make sure we can get it in through the ports, and therefore, how do you bring it up? But overhead gantries on, for electricity on motorways, looks like a lot of investment to me when it's considered it's got the F word in front of it. But if we can perhaps come up with a passenger benefit as well.
Cool, thank you, Ian. Ollie, I don't know if you've got any comments from a BPD perspective.
I wanted to ask John actually about HVO, and seems to be quite popular on the continent, but is there an issue with it being more available here? What are the issues holding it back?
The only real issue that's holding it back is probably the price, in terms of the incentive. I only know one supplier of HVO, but all our Euro 6 engines are certified to synthetic diesel EN 15940. And HVO is a lovely fuel because it doesn't affect the service of the vehicle, and it's a Monday, Friday fuel. You can use it with diesel or without diesel if you should be stuck. So, it is a great fuel, and I suppose I think the key change is as always getting paid for that extra level of greenness. But unfortunately, there is no incentive for HVO, and it is fully renewable.
Okay, thanks, John.
Over to you then, Brian, and the questions in the chat.
Okay, yeah, we haven't had so many questions yet, but again, we've got a couple, and I've pre-prepared some. So I'm going to start with Chris in particular. So who should take the lead in engaging with the huge number of small van and truck operators? And by that I mean they don't operate very many vans and trucks, not that they operate small vans and trucks, you know what I mean, to help them on their net zero journey. Yeah. And what do you think should happen first?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a role for us as the RHA to help and target the small operators. And so what was the second part of the question?
Well, what should the first step be? Well, firstly, who? Yes, clearly there's a role for you, but who should take the lead? Is it you? Is it government? Is it OEMs? Who is it? And where do we start this journey? What should be the first step to get these small operators?
Well, okay. So, I mean, in terms of who should take the lead, I mean, my reaction to that is it's a joint effort. Okay, I mean, we as a trade association have a role to play. So does the government. So do the OEMs. It's by working together, actually, a bit of joint leadership. And that's not meant as a cop-out answer. It's actually meant in real good faith, because it's by working together, by understanding the problems and challenges that we face right now, that we can come up with a solution. In terms of the next step, I go back to what I said in my presentation, which is it's about having that certainty of policy framework, basically, the consistent standard, so that it gives operators, users the confidence to invest in the technology that we want.
Thank you. John, it's good to turn to you for a moment. You mentioned Vecto, or someone mentioned Vecto, I think it was you. And obviously within that, the EU want new HGVs to be 30% lower carbon, whether that's 30% more fuel efficient or however they do it, but 30% lower carbon grams per kilometre by around 2030. But as we mentioned, we probably need them to be kind of 100% lower carbon, at least at the tailpipe, by 2040 at the latest, maybe sooner. Could the UK be more aggressive in its zero-emission vehicle and ultra-low-emission truck mandates? And if so, how do you think it should be more aggressive, or could be more aggressive?
That's an interesting one there, Brian, because as I say, we obviously have to employ technologies that Olly made very clear that are workable. There's no point having a fleet of vehicles that are prototypes or development vehicles. So again, we've spent a lot of energy and time on the LNG project, which gives a 20% reduction at tailpipe. Obviously, if you use bio LNG or renewable credits, you're there. And of course, our system uses dual fuel, so we could use HVO rather than diesel to get towards 90 to 100% if we offset. But I mean, the biggest problem is diesel is such a good fuel in terms of its efficiency and the way it is stored on the vehicle. So, you know, even using LNG on a 6x2 tractor, which is our mainstay, we have problems getting enough LNG on the vehicle, or we're limited in range. So somehow or other, as we develop new vehicles, we've also probably got to look at the 9653 and the masses and dimensions around the as well to give us a little bit more assistance there. And then the next phase is electrification. But we need to get the operators on board because, you know, even just the idea of changing a tyre or a tyre brand to give us an efficiency and rolling resistance is a major objection. And in the Specto standards, you know, changing your engine power, using kinetic recovery through turbo compounding, changing the tyres, all have a significant impact. And probably the biggest way of showing this is the pound in the pocket, because if you save CO2, you're saving fuel.
Okay, thanks.
Brian,
Reeves has asked a question for you, John, about hydrogen. Obviously, you mentioned hydrogen, and I think Volvo, my understanding of all the most, if not all, the truck OEMs are sort of looking at hydrogen primarily by fuel cells, but hydrogen combustion is also an option, of course, as a possibility for the 2030s, and some of them are starting to dabble in sort of first prototypes now. What are Volvo doing in the hydrogen space? Are you just sort of keeping your options open at the moment? Obviously, you need an electric before you can have a fuel cell vehicle. You need the electric powertrain first. So.
Yeah, I mean, our options are open. Again, in that slide, it shows the progression, and I think probably the thing that will be interesting to watch is during the COVID change, both Volvo AB and Daimler announced, obviously with the investment in this technology, you know, a joint working company to develop the system for the future.
Hi guys. It's a great discussion, and I think we can probably sort of carry on a little bit. But just to point out that it's 10 past, and I think the main stage is now going live again. I'm certainly happy to stay here for a couple more minutes and finish the conversation, but just to make sure it's a fair chance for everybody. If you'd like to go and see the really famous people, then they're on the main stage. But clearly the important stuff.
Okay, so we want one more quick question then for those.
Yes, I think let's have one more.
And that's for Chris primarily. John mentioned higher capacity vehicles. Clearly huge potential. Ian mentioned the Centre for Sustainable Road Freight. They've done lots of research in this area. Huge potential to pretty much halve the emissions of road freight if you can have double the load on one long haul truck. Do you see it? Does the climate emergency and COVID present an opportunity for us? Do you think to get high capacity vehicles up the political agenda? They've not been too popular in the last 20 years or so, in my experience. But is it time to rethink that?
Absolutely, and you know, I mean, what the title of this conference is, reset. You know, if we have to reset certain assumptions going forwards, and if high capacity vehicles is the way forward to drive down the emissions we want to see, yeah, absolutely, we're up for that debate.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian, for being the one who had to tend with the questions on the chat. That's brilliant. Thank you. Right, and then really, just to say,
nice to everyone. We will keep a record of all the other questions. So if we miss something off, we'll try and pass them on to the relevant people. They can read them now, or we'll try and pass them on offline after the event. So we'll try and get answers to as many of those as we can to you.
Indeed, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much.
And I just
Thank you.
say thank you to you all.
Thank
Really appreciate it from all the speakers, because it's not an insignificant task, particularly doing it in the virtual world. So so thank you very much, guys, and yeah, we'll see you in the rest of the in the conference.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
guys.
Cheers, thanks.